there were some really basic navigation and functionality issues that I wouldn't have spotted because I'm not in that seat. I was a bit too close to the design process. So I think good to get a bit of objectivity, but also recognize that you're probably not the best person to grade your own homework.
Hi, before we get to this week's podcast, I'd like to tell you that Automated Creative are releasing a book called How to Make It in Marketing, Volume 1. It is a collection of the best marketing career advice we've had from over 200 episodes of the Shiny New Object podcast. You'll hear from some of the biggest, brightest and best names in the industry telling you how to grow your career. You can reserve yourself a copy at this URL. So get your pens out. It's bit.ly, so bit.ly/make it in marketing. So that's bit.ly, bit.ly/make it in marketing. But the make it in marketing bit is in capital letters. So bit.ly/lowercase and the rest is make it in marketing, uppercase. I think you should get your heads around that. And enjoy. It's a great read. Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative, and this is a podcast about the future of marketing. Each week I get to interview someone senior and exciting about their vision for where it's all going to go next. And this week is no different. I'm on a call with Daniel Peach, who is Head of Digital Acceleration Programs, EMEA, Go-to-Market Strategy at Google. Daniel, for anyone who doesn't know who you are and what you do, could you give us a bit of background?
So I work, as Tom said, at Google. I run a bunch of sales programs that are focused on maturity and digital marketing. Before that, I was in business school at Oxford, so Oxford Said, got an MBA. Before that, a completely different industry. I was in consulting. Interestingly, aerospace and defense consulting with a mix of defense contractors and then the US military. And then before that, completely different industry again, audits, where I did a lot of work on transactions. So mergers and acquisitions, bankruptcies, all the fun stuff. And I went to University of South Carolina for undergrad, where I studied international business and accounting. And I'm from Orlando, Florida, originally.
Right. So, trick question, what unites all of those things apart from your physical form? They sound like very disparate types of careers and choices. Well, how does that all squish together?
I'd say about 2 to 5 years, I hit a point where I said, do I still like this? And in both cases, the answer was no. So moved on. And that works for places too. I'm not a huge fan of Orlando.
So the first question I have for you is, you are working for Google and you work in a sales function. There's going to be lots of plates to spin there, lots of opportunity. So you're going to have a lot to deal with. How do you cope with overwhelm?
Yeah, it's a good question. I felt overwhelmed at the end of the year in particular. I think everybody did. And I found myself falling into habits. And it wasn't until maybe January that I looked back and thought, oh, actually that worked. So what I do is I essentially force stop my brain. I read recently somebody at Amazon does something similar where they use Samba as a way to completely disengage, because Samba is about using your body versus your mind. I wish I was that advanced or maybe that thoughtful. I use reality TV, to be honest. It's familiar. I think American voices. I'm American, and so it's comfortable, and I don't really have to think. So it forces my mind to stop processing, but I'm also not engaged with content. And sometimes I don't even watch the TV. So something about the noise, maybe a version of white noise, that works. And occasionally I do some grunt work. So slide updates, data analysis, those are the kind of things that I think are almost like comfort food for me because I've done them for so many years, that I can do them without really thinking that much. So that's what's helped in the past few months. I think it helped reset. So
if your boss is listening to this, are you admitting that you watch reality TV during the day when you get a bit stressed?
My boss actually watches reality TV, so I'm in good company. A lot of chat about Love Island.
Brilliant sanctioned use of reality TV. And yes, Samba, that's a first mention of Samba on this podcast. I'm fairly confident. So what is your top marketing tip? What's that golden nugget of marketing advice that you find yourself sharing most often?
Yeah, I came to marketing late. Audit and consulting are quite different beasts. And so I had to do a bit of learning. And I think the best one was you are not your audience, which really resonated for somebody that hadn't really thought about the audience much before. But I think there's a through line across industries. So for instance, if you are presenting to senior leadership, your audience is not you. You have to boil down details and make it really actionable and kind of punchy. Whereas if you're building a product or a service for somebody, you very often are not the user of that product or service. So one example, I helped build a tool called Grow My Store, something on Google, basically scrapes websites and provides recommendations. And I realized when we were doing user experience testing that there were some really basic navigation and functionality issues that I wouldn't have spotted because I'm not in that seat. I was a bit too close to the design process. So I think good to get a bit of objectivity, but also recognize that you're probably not the best person to grade your own homework.
So how do you make that possible? It's advice that we've had some similar versions of that on the podcast, and it makes total sense. There's no marketer out there who's going to be like, no, you should just completely ignore your audience. Like it doesn't really need explaining. But why does it happen so infrequently? What tools and techniques do you suggest that people could use to make sure that the audience is front and center and not your whims?
Yeah, I think I tend to socialize ideas a lot before I actually start working on them. So we build in, it's kind of a common thing at Google, but also elsewhere, of building in 2 to 3 weeks of just refining an idea. And I tend to go to somebody that has zero touch with it or very low touch to just get basically ripped to shreds in a good way. I do this personally, by the way, too. So I realized my closest friends work in completely different industries. And the only thing we have in common is that we're friends. And in some cases, we went to business school together. But I think it's good. There's a bit of groupthink that tends to happen when you are working with the same people over time. So it's something about curating your network in a way that's more balanced and maybe has some objectivity. So you go to people infrequently and maybe vary the people that you go to over time.
This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with MadFest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from MadFest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. So we're going to move on now to your shiny new object, which is pride washing in marketing. So I think that's fairly self-evident what that is, but what does pride washing in marketing mean to you, and why is it your shiny new object?
Yeah, pride washing sadly, it's not new, but I think it's so pervasive that it's something that's top of mind for the LGBTQ community. And as me personally, I always feel a bit exploited in marketing that's not good. So you see a lot of examples during Pride Month. There's sort of performative marketing where companies will post a pride themed logo, and it doesn't harm us. It also doesn't help us, to be honest. It's just sort of it's social media activism. But there are actual advertisements or products or partnerships that companies will run with during Pride Month, especially, and that's usually sometime around June. That feels like we are a demo, and they are lowering the quality of advertising to try to get what's called, I think, the pink dollar, which also is a bit of a strange term, but try to market directly to the LGBT community. It's kind of subpar, and that's what bothers me personally about it.
Can you give me some examples?
Sure. So Disney came up recently, and Disney's one where you would think very kind of positive brand image. They have gay days at some of their theme parks, which is full takeover of the theme park by the gay community or lesbian community. And so they outwardly catered to the LGBT community in advertising and in services. But then they turn around and in Florida, my home state, they supported politicians that voted for anti-LGBT legislation, this Don't Say Gay bill. And it was the disparity between what they were saying in marketing channels and what they were doing in lobbying that felt like they were sending mixed messages and actively harming us while also trying to make money off of us. Lots of other ads examples too I can go through if that's useful.
Yeah, it's really good to help think about some specific examples. And any from the UK?
Yeah, so interestingly on product side, a really bad example, Marks and Spencer during Pride Month put together what's called an LGBT sandwich. And by that, they mean lettuce, guacamole, bacon, and tomato. Just really, really crazy. Yeah.
Sorry. How did that go down?
Not well, as you can imagine. They advertised it and they were universally panned and probably dragged on Twitter.
Oh dear. Okay. We've got so you've talked like big picture, politics, and then product, and you're talking about badging. Can you show me another example of what like you think really represents the worst in this pride washing?
Oh yeah, so Deutsche Bahn, which is the train line, national train line of Germany, or the company that's maybe an equivalent of Liner or something in the UK, they put together an ad which featured conductors walking down the aisle in high heels. Could be good, but also with with a bit of levity and almost making fun of that person. There was queer trauma involved where everybody was crying and sad. And then there were a lot of rainbow logos. So all of these things just mixed together to almost make fun of the LGBT community in a moment where we were meant to be celebrating. And another thing is everybody there was white, which is a common issue in advertising in general, is a lack of representation and intersectionality. So very one note, I'd say.
So who gets it right?
Yeah, we've had a few good examples, actually quite a few good examples recently. Etsy, the company, that sells kind of crafts and homeware online, they put together this ad a few years ago. I don't even think it was during Pride Month, to be honest, which is also a good thing. It was a Black gay couple going home to one of the couple's families. And the campaign was called Gift Like You Mean It. And it was all about meeting the family and getting a gift from that family to show that that partner was welcomed in the home. It felt it was a great commercial in general. I loved it. But equally, it was subtle. It didn't feel too directive. And there was a narrative that made sense for the company. So it wasn't something that was too disjointed with the overall campaign theme or the message that the company was trying to push through.
You said something that stuck out there, that it didn't run during Pride Month. So how important is that? Yeah,
I think just being realistic from a marketing planning point of view, there are key moments, tentpole moments in every year. And Pride is one of them. Obviously, Christmas is another one that comes up frequently, Easter, a few of these things. So Pride Month in the UK is kind of June, July. I think that is a fair time if companies want to advertise. But it's nice, and we in the queer community recognize when, for instance, queer characters in advertisements or products that are more geared to our community roll out outside of that period. We definitely take notice, and it's a sign of goodwill, I'd say.
You've given us some interesting examples of where it's gone wrong, and I assume there's good intentions behind those things. Maybe I'm too positive of a guy, but I'm sure there were good people involved in that, trying to do the right thing, but clearly gone horribly wrong. So if you could advise any business moving forward on how to get it right, what would be your kind of top 3, top 5, do this, don't do this bits of advice?
Yeah, I think you're right. It is always well-intentioned. Part of the challenge, I think, is that sometimes marketing teams may not have fair representation from the LGBT community on their team. So if that's the case, I think it's always good to involve queer people in the process of design or ideation. That could be charities if there's nobody in house, or if we feel, kind of going back to the advice, you are not your audience. If you want to understand your audience, making sure that if the LGBTQ community is part of the audience or is the audience, you solicit them on the front end. Also good, as we said, to land it outside of Pride Month if you can. We do appreciate it across the board, but it's always nice to see it sometime out of summer. The biggest thing in terms of content is making sure that advertisers are highlighting queer joy and not just queer trauma. So what I mean by that is very often in advertising, see two characters that have been torn apart. They maybe were in a relationship, one got married. If it's two lesbians, one got married to a man. In the case of a Renault ad from a few years ago, and they had to go through struggle and strife, and then they finally got together in the last 5 seconds for the close of the advertisement. We had a focus group recently with some Gen Zs who were overwhelmingly people of color and trans, non-binary, and gender diverse. And what they said was, what was the missing element was the queer joy, is the excitement that we feel being, part of the LGBTQ plus community. So I think more of that is always helpful. And maybe one last tip is make sure, if you are going to advertise, that your house is clean. So you're not trying to market to the LGBT community on one side, while also doing things that are undermining our civil rights on the other side.
Yeah, I think you should put that on a poster somewhere. That's great, those 4 tips. So where's this going? Is there going to be a time when it's not even necessary? Will we see Pride Month in years to come where there is no advertising focused on the community? Or is this something that should always be focused on by brands and help change the narrative for the betterment of society?
It's a good question. I mean, the LGBT market, who knows really, but the stat is £6 billion of purchasing power in the UK. So it's a big community and a big market. I don't know if advertising will strictly go away, but I think what we would love in the long term is seeing, queer people, embedded in general advertising that runs throughout the year in a way that feels intuitive and natural. A lot of brands have been doing that. You see maybe a gay couple and their child in a clothing advertisement, or you see you might see somebody that's trans featured in a wider campaign. Really, I think more native advertising is kind of what we're looking for in the long term. But Pride is a good way to test messages and just learn over time of what works and doesn't for your company.
So I'd like to understand a bit more about how you do intuitive and natural correctly, because you had like 4 very distinct things that would be very easy, not easy, but they're unequivocal really. Whereas intuitive and natural, that's pretty vague. So can you help the audience understand what you mean by that and how that could be achieved?
Sure. I'll use another example. So Oreo put together a commercial, and I think this was a global commercial outside of Pride Month, but they did work with an LGBTQ charity to help put the ad together. It told the story of a family coming together and wanting to enjoy Oreos, but it did it in a way where it was very clear that there were 2, gay daughters as part of the family, and the father kind of stepped forward and in a way subtly, showed pride for his daughter. This was an advertisement that would have worked in any capacity, not just during Pride Month, but you could put it on in October and it would equally have the same value. It was an advertisement that they would have run in general, but it just happened to have queer characters. And I think the kind of embedding queer characters in those narrative storylines in advertisements is what's, I think, helpful in the long term. So just making it a normal part of putting ads together versus trying to create something specific for the LGBT community that may only run a few times during a month.
So what are you expecting to see this year from advertisers in this space? Do you think it's going to get a bit better? Is it going to slip a bit? What are your fears and hopes for the summer?
I think we're trying to be a bit more proactive about guiding what best practices look like in advertising to the queer community. So YouTube is working on with Albert Kennedy Trust, which is a charity in the UK, and an agency called Distillery, on putting together basically brand guidelines. So both across advertising, this is the main focus there is video ads, but equally, product ideation, sponsorships. And the idea is really guiding the brands that we work with on a daily basis to do this in a way we would say is maybe best practice. And this is going back to that focus group of Gen Zs who were predominantly marginalized groups. Those are the audience that we listen to for those to curate those best practices. So over time, we want to influence brands to think about this in a way that feels more I don't know, going back to more natural or something, but I think the idea is it's probably a slow change, but the more people can be thoughtful about how they're putting together advertising for the queer community, the better. And it's probably a slow change, but something that we want to help everyone get, improve over time.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. So if someone wants to get in touch with you to talk about your day-to-day or pride washing and how not to do it, where would you like them to get in touch with you, and what makes a great outreach message to you?
I'd say LinkedIn, and I always appreciate great copy, but honestly, just feel free to reach out, say, I heard you on the podcast, and I guarantee you I will answer. Very happy to.
Well, thank you for your time. As we came into this subject, I was like, I do not know as much about this as I should, but you've made what is a very emotive and important subject really simple to take action with as an agency supplier or a brand. So I really appreciate you sharing your time on that, Daniel.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hi, just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the shiny new Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That would just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.